The morning my front door would not open, I thought my key had finally worn down. I stood on the porch longer than I should have, twisting the metal back and forth, listening to it scrape uselessly against something unfamiliar inside the lock. The air was sharp with early winter. My breath came out in thin clouds that disappeared as quickly as they formed. My fingers were already numb, but I kept trying, slower each time, as if patience alone could convince the door to remember me. Nothing. I stepped back and looked at the house, the same pale blue paint I had chosen after my husband died because it felt calm, the same brass handle I polished every spring, the same narrow window beside the door where I used to watch my daughter race up the steps after school. Everything looked the same, except the lock. It was new, too new, shiny in a way nothing else on this house had been in years. That was when the pressure started in my chest. Not panic, not fear, just a tightening, like my body understood something my mind was still refusing to touch. I knocked. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet street. Somewhere far away a dog barked. A car drove past without slowing. No one looked. I knocked again, harder this time, my knuckles stinging. No footsteps, no voices, no answer. I set my grocery bag down and reached for my phone. Milk had tipped on its side inside the bag. I could smell it faintly, sweet and sour at the same time. Eggs cracked with a soft final sound. I called my daughter. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Still nothing. My hands were shaking now. Not visibly, just enough that I noticed. I told myself she was busy. She had meetings. She had responsibilities. She had always been busy. My phone buzzed in my palm. A text message. Mom, we talked about this. You cannot come back without notice. We changed the locks for safety reasons. For safety reasons. I read it once, then again, then slowly, word by word, as if the meaning might soften if I gave it time. I typed back with stiff fingers. Whose safety? The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. This is for the best. Please do not make a scene. I felt something drop inside me, not break, drop, like an object falling down a deep well, taking time before it hit anything solid. I looked down at my hands. They looked older than I remembered, the skin thinner, the veins more visible, hands that had held my daughter when she was feverish. Hands that had paid every mortgage payment on this house for decades. I was locked out. I knocked again, this time without thinking. Once, twice, 3 times. My breath came faster now, my chest tight in a way that made me press my palm against it. I called her name through the door, quiet at first, then louder. No answer. I slid down onto the top step and sat there, my coat pulled tight around me, my grocery bag forgotten. The porch boards were cold even through my clothes. I watched my breath fog the air and wondered how long I had been sitting there. Minutes, maybe longer. A neighbor across the street opened her door, glanced in my direction, hesitated, then went back inside. I could not blame her. From the outside, it probably looked like a misunderstanding. An older woman locked out, a simple mistake. But I knew better, because locks are not changed by accident. I stood up slowly, my knees stiff, and walked around the side of the house. The back door was locked too, new deadbolt. The basement entrance, locked. Even the garage, every entry point sealed. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool siding of the house and closed my eyes. This was not about safety. This was removal. My phone buzzed again. I am at work. We will talk later. Please go somewhere warm. Somewhere warm. Not inside, not home, somewhere else. I laughed then, a short sound that surprised me with its bitterness. It came out before I could stop it, echoing faintly in the narrow space between houses. I had lived here longer than my daughter had been alive, and yet, with a few signatures and a new lock, I had become a guest without permission. I picked up my grocery bag, eggs ruined, milk leaking, and walked down the steps. My legs felt heavy, like they belonged to someone else. I did not know where I was going. I only knew I could not stay there, standing in front of a house that no longer recognized me. As I reached the sidewalk, one thought kept repeating, steady and cold. I had not lost my home in a fire. I had not sold it. I had not died. I had been erased while I was still breathing. I used to believe raising a child was like planting a tree. You nurture it, protect it, teach it to stand on its own, and one day you sit in its shade. That belief carried me through years that were harder than I ever admitted out loud. My daughter was born in late summer, during a heat wave that left the hospital rooms sticky and restless. I remember holding her for the first time, her skin warm and soft, her tiny fingers curling around mine as if she already understood the world was something to grip tightly. I told her then that I would always be there. I meant it in the simple, absolute way only a young mother can. Her father left when she was 7. Not dramatically, no shouting, no slammed doors, just a quiet packing of boxes and a sentence that ended our marriage as neatly as a period at the end of a line. I stood in the kitchen after he drove away, staring at the refrigerator covered in drawings and school notices, and realized there was no one left to fall apart in front of. So I didn't. I worked longer hours at the library, shelving books in the early mornings and helping patrons in the afternoons. I learned how to stretch meals, how to smile through exhaustion, how to tuck fear away where my daughter could not see it. At night, I sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing slowed, listening to the small sounds of sleep, reminding myself that as long as she was safe, I could manage everything else. When I bought the house, it felt like a promise. It was nothing special. Narrow hallway, creaky floors, a porch that needed constant repair, but it was ours. I painted her bedroom pale yellow because she said it felt like sunshine. I measured her height on the doorframe every year, marking it in pencil, never imagining those lines would one day fade into something she barely remembered. We built a life in that house. Birthdays with homemade cakes, school projects spread across the dining table, quiet evenings where we watched television together, her feet tucked under my leg. When she cried over friendships and first heartbreaks, I listened. When she succeeded, I cheered louder than anyone. I taught her to drive in the empty high school parking lot, my hands gripping the door handle as tightly as the seatbelt. I taught her how to balance a checkbook, how to speak up for herself, how to leave a situation that did not feel right. I thought I was teaching her independence. I did not realize I was also teaching her how to survive without me. When she left for college, the house echoed. I walked from room to room, touching things that no longer had a purpose. Her old posters, the chipped mug she refused to throw away, the dent in the wall from a door slammed during a teenage argument that now felt almost sweet. I cried that night, but I was proud. She married young, too young, if I am being honest. I saw the signs before she did, the way she apologized for things that were not her fault, the way she dimmed herself to keep the peace. When the marriage ended, she came back to me with a toddler on her hip and a look in her eyes that told me she felt like she had failed. I opened the door without hesitation. That was my daughter, my grandchild, my family. We fell into an easy rhythm at first. Shared dinners, late-night conversations once the baby was asleep. She told me she was grateful. She said she did not know what she would do without me. When she talked about finances, I listened. When she struggled, I helped. I paid for daycare, covered groceries, handed over money without keeping track, because that is what mothers do. I told myself this was temporary. Then my husband died, suddenly, quietly. One evening he was there, complaining about the weather and the news. The next morning, he was gone. The house felt different immediately. Too big, too quiet, too full of echoes that followed me from room to room. My daughter stepped in then. She handled phone calls, appointments, forms. She told me not to worry. She told me to rest. She said she would take care of things, and I let her. Grief makes you tired in a way sleep cannot fix. It softens your edges, makes you grateful for anyone willing to carry the weight for a while. That is how it started. Not with cruelty, not with greed, with comfort, with familiarity, with love that slowly, quietly began to shift its shape. By the time I noticed the shade had moved, I was already standing in the dark. The first lie did not arrive as a lie. It arrived wrapped in concern, spoken softly across my own kitchen table, while afternoon light slid across the floor like it always had. My daughter sat across from me with a folder I did not recognize. It was neat, labeled, too organized for something I had not asked for. She tapped it lightly with her fingernail, a small, repetitive sound that made my chest tighten for reasons I could not yet name. She told me she had been worried, not about anything specific, just worried in general. She said she had noticed I seemed tired, that I forgot small things sometimes, that after everything I had been through, maybe it was time I let someone else help carry the load. I remember smiling then. I remember saying that everyone forgets things. She smiled back, patient, reassuring, the way a mother smiles at a child who insists they can cross the street alone. "This is just paperwork," she said. "Nothing changes. It just makes things easier if something ever happens. Something always happens eventually." She slid the papers toward me and pointed to the places where I needed to sign. Her pen waited in her hand, already uncapped, already confident I would take it. I hesitated. It was brief, just a pause long enough for me to feel it, a tightening behind my ribs, the same quiet pressure I would later feel standing on my porch. I asked what the papers were. "Power of attorney," she said quickly. "Medical and financial. Totally standard, just in case." Just in case. She told me everyone our age had one. She told me she would never use it without asking. She told me it was only for emergencies. Then she leaned back slightly and sighed. "Mom, do you not trust me?" That question landed harder than it should have. Trust had never been something I questioned with her. It was built into every part of our relationship. I trusted her the way you trust gravity, the way you trust your own name. So I signed. The pen felt heavier than usual. I remember that clearly. My hand shook just enough that I noticed, and I laughed it off, blaming the coffee. She gathered the papers quickly, efficiently, and kissed my cheek. She thanked me for being practical, for thinking ahead. That night, I slept poorly, not because I was afraid, but because something felt unfinished, like a conversation that ended too soon. In the weeks that followed, small things began to shift. Mail arrived less often. When I asked about it, she said she had switched everything to paperless to help me stay organized. Bank statements stopped appearing in the mailbox. She said that was normal now. Everything was online. She began driving me to appointments even when I said I was fine. At the doctor's office, she answered questions before I could, corrected me when I spoke, joked about my memory in a way that made everyone laugh. I laughed too. It felt easier than objecting. She suggested we simplify my finances, consolidate accounts, reduce stress. She said stress was bad for my heart. I believed her. When I asked for numbers, she told me not to worry. When I asked for copies, she said she would get them later. When I asked too many questions, she grew quiet, wounded. I started doubting myself. Maybe I was forgetting things. Maybe I was repeating myself. Maybe this was what aging looked like from the inside. That was the most dangerous part. The lie was not just what she told me. The lie was what I started telling myself. I stopped checking, stopped asking, stopped insisting. The house still felt like mine. My name was still on the mailbox. My clothes still hung in the closet. But something essential had already been handed over. Control does not always announce itself. Sometimes it slips in quietly, smiling, and waits for you to stop noticing. By the time I realized something was wrong, the paperwork was already filed, the systems already changed, and the story about me was already being written without my permission. The first lie had done its job. It made everything that followed possible. The locks were changed on a Monday. I know that because Sunday night I had still slept in my own bed. I remember pulling the quilt up to my chin, listening to the house settle the way it always did. small cracks and sighs in the walls like an old body getting comfortable. I remember thinking I should wash the curtains soon. I remember nothing feeling urgent. By Tuesday morning, I was homeless. After I left the porch that day, after the realization settled into something heavy and unavoidable, I drove without direction. I circled streets I had known for decades, streets where I had walked my daughter to school, streets where neighbors still waved because they recognized my face even if they did not know what had just been done to me. I parked eventually in a grocery store lot and sat there with the engine running, staring at nothing. My phone stayed silent. No apology, no explanation, just the echo of that message, for safety reasons. I did not cry yet. Shock has a way of keeping tears locked behind something firm and artificial. By afternoon, the cold had worked its way deep into my bones. I called Patricia, my neighbor from 3 houses down. We were not close, but she had always been kind in a quiet way. She answered on the second ring and did not ask many questions when I told her I could not get into my house. She just said, "Come here." I slept on her couch that night. She gave me an extra blanket and pretended not to notice how carefully I folded my clothes, as if order might return if I maintained it. The next morning, a man knocked on her door. He wore a neat coat and held a folder pressed flat against his chest. He introduced himself politely and asked for me by name. The way he said it told me he already knew who I was. I stepped forward before Patricia could answer for me. He handed me an envelope. Inside was paper heavy with official language, words stacked on top of each other in ways that felt deliberately confusing. Patricia read it first. Her face changed slowly as she scanned the page. She told me it was a notice of terminated occupancy. I asked what that meant. She swallowed and said, "It means they are saying you do not live there anymore." I laughed. A reflex, a soft, incredulous sound. I told her there had to be a mistake. The man shook his head gently. He said the property owner had requested the notice. He said my daughter's name like it was nothing more than a fact on a page. I felt something hollow open up inside me. I asked how this was possible. He told me the deed had been transferred months earlier. Months. While I cooked dinner in that kitchen, while I paid utilities, while I believed the house was still mine. I called my daughter again. She answered this time. Her voice was calm, almost relieved. She said she had been meaning to talk to me about this. She said the house was too much responsibility for me now. She said I was not safe living alone. She said she had done what was necessary. I asked her where she expected me to go. She said we would figure that out. Not we. Me. That was when I finally cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears that slid down my face while I stared at the floor of someone else's living room. I realized then that this was not about my safety. This was about convenience. I was no longer useful as I was. I took up space. I asked questions. I complicated plans. So they had removed me. The eviction was not a single moment. It was the accumulation of quiet decisions made without me, each one small enough to justify, each one leading inevitably to a locked door and a piece of paper declaring I no longer belonged. That night, lying awake on Patricia's couch, staring at a ceiling that was not mine, I understood something with painful clarity. My daughter had not pushed me out in anger. She had pushed me out calmly, efficiently, and legally. And that frightened me far more. I did not go looking for answers right away. For 2 days after the eviction notice, I existed in a kind of fog. I ate when food was put in front of me. I slept in short stretches. My body moved, but my mind stayed fixed on the image of that new lock, bright and unfamiliar against a door I had opened thousands of times. Patricia gave me space. That mattered. She did not rush me into solutions or questions. She let the silence do its work. It was on the third morning that something in me shifted. I woke before dawn, the house quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee I did not taste, and realized I could not stay suspended between confusion and grief forever. If my daughter had done this, then she had done more. You do not change locks and transfer deeds without laying groundwork first. That thought settled into me slowly, but once it did, it refused to leave. I asked Patricia if I could use her computer. She hesitated just briefly, then nodded. She did not ask why. The screen glowed softly in the dim kitchen. I stared at it longer than necessary before touching the mouse. My hands felt clumsy, like they did not quite belong to me anymore. I started with the county property records. I typed in my address. The page loaded, and there it was. My house, listed cleanly and clearly, with a date stamped beside it. Ownership transferred 6 months earlier. 6 months. My name was gone. In its place was a trust I did not recognize. The trustee listed was my daughter. I leaned back in the chair and pressed my fingers to my temples, breathing slowly. This was not impulsive. This was planned. I opened another tab, bank accounts. I logged in using passwords I had not changed in years. Or so I thought. Access denied. I tried again. Still denied. My heart began to pound, not with panic, but with a steady, insistent urgency. I called the bank. After navigating automated menus and being placed on hold, a woman finally answered. She asked me to verify my identity. Then she paused. She told me she could not discuss the account with me. I laughed again, that same hollow sound. I told her I was the account holder. She apologized. She said the account had been restructured, that my daughter was now the primary contact under power of attorney. I asked how much money was left. There was another pause. She said she could not tell me that either. When I hung up, my hands were shaking openly now. I opened old email accounts, dug through folders I had not touched in years. Buried beneath newsletters and advertisements were notices I had missed or ignored. Changes confirmed. Statements delivered electronically. Approvals logged. Each one felt like a small betrayal all its own. I realized then how carefully the story had been managed, how gradually I had been removed from my own life. I found a folder on Patricia's printer tray where I had printed the eviction notice the day before. On impulse, I began adding to it. Screenshots, copies, notes scribbled on lined paper. The act of collecting steadied me. That afternoon, I went back to the house. Not to go inside. I knew better. I stood across the street and looked at it from a distance. A moving truck was parked in the driveway. 2 men carried boxes out the front door, my front door, as if they belonged there. One box split open slightly as it was set down. I saw a flash of blue and white. My dishes. The ones I had bought piece by piece over years. The ones I used every Sunday. I turned away before they could see me. Back at Patricia's, I sat down and made a call I had hoped I would never need to make. A lawyer. His office smelled like old paper and coffee that had been reheated too many times. He did not interrupt as I spoke. He did not soften his expression. When I finished, he folded his hands and said something that changed everything. What you are describing is elder financial abuse. The words landed heavily, but they fit. He explained how power of attorney could be misused, how trust documents could be created and activated quietly, how property transfers could happen without immediate notice. He told me this was not uncommon. That hurt more than anything else, he said. He asked me if I had copies of anything. I slid Patricia's folder across the desk. As he flipped through it, his brow furrowed. This was done carefully, he said, but not perfectly. He looked up at me. You still have options. For the first time since the locks had been changed, I felt something other than grief. I felt clarity. The discovery was not just about what had been taken. It was about understanding how it had been taken and by whom. And once I understood that, I knew one thing for certain. I was not finished yet. The confrontation did not happen the way I imagined it would. There was no shouting at first, no dramatic entrance, no slammed doors. It began with a text message from my daughter that simply said, "We need to talk." I stared at my phone for a long time before answering. My lawyer had advised me not to go alone, not to meet her without witnesses, not to say anything that could be twisted later. But part of me needed to see her face, needed to hear her voice without the filter of legal language. I agreed to meet at a cafe halfway between Patricia's house and mine. Neutral ground, public, safe. The cafe was busy when I arrived. Cups clinked. Steam hissed from the espresso machine. Conversations overlapped in a soft blur that made everything feel unreal, like I was stepping into someone else's life. She was already there. She sat near the window, scrolling on her phone, perfectly composed. Her hair was neat, her coat expensive. She looked up when she saw me and smiled as if we were meeting for lunch like we used to. "Mom," she said warmly, "you look tired." I did not sit down right away. I asked her how long. Her smile flickered just barely. "How long what? How long have you been planning this?" She exhaled slowly and set her phone face down on the table. She told me I was being dramatic, that I was misunderstanding things again, that everything she had done was for my own good. I asked her why the locks were changed. She said she panicked, that she was worried I would come back and hurt myself trying to force the door, that it was temporary. Temporary. I asked her why the house had been transferred. She leaned forward then, lowering her voice like she was explaining something sensitive to a child. She said I had signed the papers, that I had agreed to it, that it was all legal. I told her I had spoken to a lawyer. Her eyes sharpened. She asked me why I would involve strangers in family matters. I told her because family had already decided I no longer counted. That was when the mask slipped. She straightened in her chair, her voice losing its softness. She told me I was being ungrateful, that after everything she had done for me, this was how I repaid her, that I did not understand how difficult it had been to manage my life for me, manage my life. She said I was confused, that my memory was unreliable, that everyone had noticed it. I felt the room tilt slightly, not from fear, but from clarity. I told her I knew about the trust, about the accounts, about the timeline. I told her I knew she had been moving money months before my husband died. Her mouth opened then closed. She said nothing. The silence stretched between us, heavy and undeniable. Finally, she said it did not matter, that what was done, that I should accept it and let things be easier. Easier for who? I asked. She did not answer. I told her I wanted my house back. She laughed then, not kindly, not gently. She told me that would never happen, that the paperwork was airtight, that no one would believe me over her. She told me I should be careful, that making accusations could backfire, that people might start questioning my competence. There it was, the threat. I stood up slowly, my hands steady, my voice quiet. I told her I had already documented everything, that I had copies, records, dates, that I was not confused, and I was not alone. For the first time, she looked unsure. I told her this was the last conversation we would have without lawyers present. She told me I was making a mistake. I told her she had already made one. I walked out of the cafe without looking back. My legs trembled once I reached the sidewalk, but I kept walking until the air felt real again. The confrontation did not end the conflict, but it ended something else. It ended my doubt, and that was more powerful than she ever expected. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, carried by other people's voices, by documents stamped and signed, by pauses in conversations where no one could quite meet my eyes. After the cafe, everything moved faster than I was ready for. My lawyer filed the paperwork that same afternoon. Emergency injunctions, requests for financial accounting, a formal challenge to the trust and the deed transfer. The language was sharp and precise, stripped of emotion, and that helped more than I expected. Seeing my life reduced to facts made it harder for anyone to rewrite it. Within days, the phone calls started, not from my daughter, from banks, from offices, from people who suddenly realized they might be standing on unstable ground. One call came from a woman who introduced herself as a social worker assigned to review a report that had been filed about me. She spoke gently, professionally, as if she were approaching a nervous animal. She told me there had been concerns raised about my ability to live independently. Concerns filed by my daughter. My hands went cold as I held the phone. The social worker asked if she could visit me. I said yes. When she arrived 2 days later, she sat across from me at Patricia's dining table, notebook open, eyes attentive. She asked me simple questions first: my name, the date, where I was staying. Then harder ones, about my finances, my memory, my daily routines. I answered calmly. Truth has a steadiness to it. You do not have to force it to sound convincing. She reviewed the documents my lawyer had prepared, the timelines, the transfers, the recorded notices. Her pen slowed as she read. Finally, she looked up and said something I will never forget. You are not the person being protected here. She told me the report would be noted accordingly, that false claims of incapacity were taken seriously, that attempts to remove someone's autonomy under false pretenses often backfired. After she left, I sat very still. The truth was no longer just mine. It had entered the system. The next revelation came from the bank. An audit revealed withdrawals I had never approved, transfers made under authority that technically existed but had been used beyond its intended scope, funds moved into accounts that benefited my daughter directly. The amounts were not small. They were deliberate. My lawyer laid it out plainly. This was not care. This was exploitation. I felt sick hearing it spoken aloud, not because it surprised me anymore, but because it made everything irreversible. Once you name something honestly, you cannot return to pretending it was something else. The final truth came from a place I did not expect. A letter arrived addressed to Patricia's house, forwarded from my old mailbox. It was from a neighbor who had noticed the moving truck, who had overheard a conversation, who had assumed I already knew. They wrote carefully, apologetically. They told me my daughter had been telling people I was confused, that I had agreed to move, that I was grateful for her help. I folded the letter and set it down. That was when the grief finally hit. Not the sharp kind, the quiet kind, the kind that comes when you realize the story being told about you has replaced the one you lived. The truth was not just about money or property. It was about erasure, about how easily a lifetime can be rewritten if the right person speaks loudly enough and the wrong person stays silent. But I was no longer silent, and the truth once uncovered has a way of demanding space. The collapse did not come with sirens or shouting. It came quietly, through official envelopes and missed phone calls and the sudden absence of confidence in my daughter's voice. The first thing to fall apart was her certainty. My lawyer informed me that the court had granted a temporary restraining order on the trust and all related accounts. Nothing could be sold. Nothing could be moved. Every transaction would now be examined. That same afternoon, my daughter called for the first time since the cafe. Her voice was different, not calm, not controlled. She asked me what I was doing. I told her I was protecting myself. She said I was ruining everything. I said nothing. She began to cry then, loudly, desperately. She told me she was under pressure, that she had only been trying to help, that things had gotten out of hand. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I told her this conversation would now go through lawyers. She hung up. The investigation moved quickly after that. The bank froze accounts. The title transfer was flagged. The trust document was suspended pending review. Each step was small on its own, but together they formed something undeniable. The structure she had built around my life began to crack. People who had believed her started asking questions. Professionals who had taken her word began requesting proof. The story she had told about me did not hold up under light. She tried to regain control. She sent messages apologizing, then blaming, pleading, then threatening. She said I would regret this, that family matters should stay private, that public exposure would destroy us both. I did not respond. Silence this time was not weakness. It was boundary. The final blow came when the court ordered a full accounting of my assets. The numbers spoke clearly. Money moved before consent was needed. Decisions made without consultation. Benefits flowing in one direction. When my lawyer called to explain the findings, I closed my eyes and listened to his voice become distant, like it was coming from another room. He said the evidence was strong. He said the trust would likely be voided. He said my house would return to my name. I sat there long after the call ended, my hands resting in my lap, feeling the strange weight of victory mixed with loss. My daughter's control collapsed because it had been built on something fragile. Deception. Once that broke, there was nothing left to hold it up. And in the quiet aftermath, I realized something that surprised me. I was still standing. Not because I had been spared, but because I had finally refused to disappear. The house is quiet again. Not the hollow quiet it held the night my husband died, and not the uneasy quiet of Patricia's guest room where I slept wondering who I was without a key to my own door. This quiet feels earned. It settles instead of presses. I walked back into my home for the first time on a clear morning, the kind where light spills gently across the floor as if nothing bad had ever happened there. The lock had been changed back. My name was on the deed again. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood and something familiar that made my chest tighten. I stood in the entryway and did not move for a long time. I touched the wall, the door frame, the place where pencil marks still measured a child who no longer lived here. Everything was exactly where I had left it, and yet nothing was the same. My daughter does not live here anymore. We do not speak. That truth still aches some days. I would be lying if I said it did not, but the ache is clean. It does not come with confusion or fear. It does not demand I give up pieces of myself to make it stop. I learned something through all of this. Love does not mean surrendering your voice. Trust does not mean handing over your life without question. And age does not make you invisible unless you allow it to. I am still here. I make my own tea. I unlock my own door. I decide what happens next. If you are listening to this and something inside you feels tight, if you recognize even a small piece of yourself in my story, please know this. You are not alone. Your life still belongs to you, and it is never too late to take it back. If this story meant something to you, stay with me, share it with someone who might need it, and come back again. Quiet truths deserve to be heard.